Ladies and gentlemen, may I encourage everyone to please take your seats. We are about to begin. So welcome to GITEX Global, the largest tech show in the world, and a very special welcome here at Expand North Star, our dedicated landmark startup event, the largest in the world. And here we are at our brand new venue at the Dubai Harbour. We've had an exciting 2 days already and another 2 fantastically action-packed days, all organized for you. My name's Amandeep. I'm very pleased to be your host throughout this week. I came to the UAE as a BBC presenter, and I've had a chance to see for myself how this country, and in particular this city, has become the leading tech hub of the world. And I put this down to the global environment that's really encouraged here. We've got amazing, inspiring Emiratis working alongside and in collaboration with the international experts as well. So, without further ado, allow me to set the scene for you for our very first session. We are pleased to invite back on stage to moderate this session Josh Constine, who is a Signalfire ex-editor-in-large of TechCrunch, and he'll have a very special guest with him, Melvin Lubega, who's founder and director of Go1 Australia. They're looking at the next generation of unicorns. So a lot of exciting highbrow conversation to begin day 3 here at Expand North. Please give them a very warm welcome to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Josh Constine, and I'm excited to be here with you today with Melvin Lubega from Go1, one of the most incredible education startups in the world. And today we're going to be discussing what is going on with the change in pace and diligence process around venture capital. We have seen a massive shift happen after years of a bull run where we saw venture capital funds throwing dollars at startups as fast as they could, competing not on doing the best diligence, but on just being the fastest person to write a check. We saw an enormous issue. The implosion of companies like FTX and the extraordinary fraud and the billions of dollars that they committed, as well as at other startups like Frank, a fintech startup for student loan payments, who had to unravel its massive acquisition by one of the world's leading banks because of huge amounts of fraud, lying about the number of users that it had. And yet, VCs missed these issues and readily funded these companies over and over again. And so today we're going to be discussing, why did this happen? How has the venture capital industry changed in the wake of the bull run and the sort of crash of the market in mid-2022? And what does that mean for founders as they try to tell their story and convince venture capitalists to give them cash to keep making their visions come true? So thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you, Josh.
I would love to just start off by maybe asking you, what was your experience like fundraising for Go1 sort of before this crash? And have you seen any major changes in the last year and a half since this crash occurred?
Yeah, no, definitely. And so across our core business, Go1, we've probably raised about $450 million. And depending on the stage of company you're at, you have different experiences raising. I mean, pre-seed seed is generally hard, particularly in Africa. It's quite difficult. But I definitely found before the crash, before even COVID, there was definitely a willingness for, you found venture capital and big investors to your point, be a bit, let's say, quick in how they want to raise. So for example, when we began our business, I was speaking to my co-founder. We'd speak to 100 investors to get 2 checks. Now you want 2 checks, but you get 100 investors. And I think that was the situation just before the crash, because there was so much capital in venture capital and chasing all sorts of good deals. So if you were growing more than 3 times a year and you were profitable or had some good unit economics, there was a very strong push towards trying to invest in you. Whereas I think to your point now, what you find now is there's a bit more, I think, more rationalism in the process. I think, there was an assumption that everything could grow, and as long as it was growing, you'd make your money. Whereas I find today there's more thoughtfulness by investors. I mean, you speak to investors, they almost want to double down around their existing portfolio companies versus making new investments, almost like what you know. And the reason that is because the company you're already in, you know better. And therefore, you're able to invest with conviction, knowing that you won't necessarily find something that is nefarious under the hood after that investment's taken place.
Yeah, it seems like that there was this huge shift where previously funds just always assumed that there would be somebody else to invest again on top of them down the line, which often led to capital-intensive startups that were, often just given money to go and buy ads to drive growth. And we've seen a huge shift recently at our fund, Signalfire, where, startups are smart. They don't go out there asking, hey, we want to raise $20 million and spend 10 of it on advertisement, because they know that that's just not a great use of their capital. They need to be building in product-led growth. They need viral feedback loops. They need channel partnerships and other ways to sustainably grow instead. And it feels like what's also happened is that there has been a massive LP crunch. And so if you wind back to why this is all happening, when the public markets crashed in the early 2022, what that meant was that limited partners, the people who invest in venture capital funds, they saw all of their public equities, their stocks drop in value. And what that meant was normally venture capital was supposed to only be 10 or 15% of their total portfolio. It was the riskiest part of their portfolio. But now, suddenly, when their public equities dropped so much, the venture capital portion, that bucket, became so much bigger. It was 30, 35, 40% of their total equities. And that meant that, wow, they were way too risky. Too much of their money was in a space that was far too risky for them to be comfortable. And so we've seen this pullback, what we call the LP crunch, where a lot of LPs are saying, hey, we are not going to fund emerging managers anymore, brand new venture capital funds that are unproven. We are going to slow our deployments to existing venture capital funds that we've worked with for years and have great returns, but we're just not going to give them money so frequently or in as much anymore. And for any fund that was not performing well, they were just getting cut outright. And I think you've seen in the news, some of the world's biggest venture capital funds have gone out looking to raise, $10, $12 billion and come back with $2 billion instead because venture cap or their limited partners just don't have that capital to give them. And I think a lot of those LPs are mad because they saw those venture capitalists just tossing money haphazardly at companies without doing their diligence, without actually understanding what is the competitive market, what are the unit economics, what is the go-to-market strategy. And I think that has led LPs to instead funnel that cash towards venture capital funds that were much more steady and cautious and disciplined during the last fund cycle. And that's what we've seen. We were very cautious, honestly, when everyone else was bidding up the crypto world. Apologies to the pavilion over there. We were a little bit skeptical, to be honest. And we invested in some infrastructure companies like Alchemy, which was valued at $10 billion recently. But all of the NFT application layer stuff, we were a little bit skeptical on when other venture funds were just readily plowing cash into that market. And now LPs have said, wow, you were the steady hand at the till. You were the one that I could trust and rely on. And they've been rewarding funds like that with more capital recently.
So, interesting point on that. So obviously in venture capital, you aren't marking to market every day. So you don't know the value of your assets or the things you've invested in. So for an LP, I think the biggest risk is where everyone's inflated their valuations at the last round. And so I think it's difficult now, and I'll get to thoughts as a venture capitalist, whether LPs are able to see the benefits of your steady investing in the short term. Because right now, everyone's in the same companies, and there's almost a wait and see what happens at the end. So I think about in our world where I have a venture fund where you focus in Europe and Africa investments. And it's almost so difficult to know whether a company is going to succeed or fail, because everyone has enough runway to get past the tech crunch or the tech winter that's in front of us.
Yeah, I think instead we've seen companies saying, rather than going out to raise quite as frequently, we're going to try to be a lot more cautious with our own capital. And honestly, that's a good thing, because we see one of the biggest mistakes startups make is that they try to solve for product market fit with cash by just hiring tons of product managers and advisors and people who've done this before. But a giant boardroom full of people having too many cooks in the kitchen, as we say, does not get you to product market fit. In fact, often having a leaner team, being willing to be more cautious with capital, being scrappy and saying, hey, what can we do to make this work without a ton of investment is actually a better recipe for success for these kind of startups. So I would love to hear, what were some of the best diligence questions that you were asked as you were raising for your education startup Go1? Would love to hear what you were actually excited to be asked versus the questions that you felt were more superfluous, more surface level, and didn't really help their investment process.
So for me, the most impactful one was, why us? Why us as an investor? Because yes, as a startup, you want to raise money, you want to grow. But the question is, why do you want money from that particular investor? And I think an investor who's aware of what they can offer and what they can't offer is so telling. Because ultimately, it's a longer-term relationship. So we've been in Go1 for the last 9 years. And just asking yourself the question of, when they ask you, but why us? It one shows how they think about you, but also how you think about them. And that was very valuable in thinking through that. I think now, to your point, when you hear from venture capitalists, and less so at our stage, we're a bit like Series D, Series E, but definitely earlier stage in some of our portfolio companies, where it's often understanding why you're raising the money and how you're going to spend it. I think, at some point there was a world wherein if you're doing a pre-seed round, it was minimum 5 million post money or 10 million. And there was never interrogation of why that value, why that amount. And I think for us, when we invest out of our VC fund, Brigger, we ask ourselves the question, do we actually understand the use of funds? It can't just be a sake of why you're raising $1 million. Oh no, because the last guys last year at our stage raised $1 million. And I think the investors that ask the questions, which you take for granted in private equity in public markets, you'd always ask the question. But in venture, it's almost like, I want to ask the founder why, but I don't want to also, be almost too greedy and ask him questions that make him feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think we've seen a great shift. One of the most positive things to come out of this change in the market is that founders are considering VC firms based on what they can do for them, the value adds, not just the valuations. And so that's how we built our fund, Signalfire. We said, let's build AI to help our companies with recruiting. Let's build a whole in-house talent team to help with recruiting. Let's recruit advisors like the founders of YouTube and Instagram to help our companies. We hired the CMO of Stripe to be a full-time operating partner. I worked at TechCrunch for 8 years as an editor. I help our companies with fundraising and PR advisory, and we love companies that come to us saying, these are the specific value adds that we actually want. We're not just looking for a check from anyone. We often ask them, what specifically are you looking for in a partner? And I think that's a really good question for people to ask themselves when they're going out to raise. I think one of the other big things that really matters now is that it used to be that as long as you had defensible technology and some growth, that people would give you money. And now, I think founders really have to be able to do incredible storytelling as well, especially technical co-founders who can often be so close to their startup that they don't actually know how to talk about it. They list off the features rather than talking about how it actually changes the world, how it's actually helping their customers. Yeah. And the number one thing I ask startups and I ask founders is, what is your superhero origin story? And what I mean by that is, what is the thing that's going to make you relentlessly driven to succeed and build this company, no matter what obstacles and challenges you face? It's a little bit like Batman. Batman's parents were murdered by a robber in Gotham City, so he grew up wanting to become a crime fighter and clean up the mean streets of Gotham. And I want to talk to a founder and say, and tell me, oh, my parents, they dealt with this problem, this financial issue, my whole upbringing, and it really vexed them, and so I wanted to solve that problem. One of my favorite examples is Jan Koum. He was one of the co-founders of WhatsApp. His parents moved from the Ukraine to the United States when he was very young, and they didn't have the money to afford long-distance phone calls, and so he felt super isolated from his family. And when he told investors that, hey, I wanted to build a free messaging app so everyone in the world could feel connected to their family because I lacked that. I was missing that when I was growing up. That really gave people, investors, the faith that even though he was going up against iMessage and Facebook Messenger, even though it was such a big market to conquer and they were such a small startup, that they had a real chance to change the world with WhatsApp. So we'd love to hear just how do you talk about your own personal superhero origin story, and how do you recommend founders out there communicate their own personal story as related to their startup?
It's so important, and I think ultimately people invest in people, people partner with people, people work for people. And so by telling your startup story and your superhero origin story, people get to connect with you beyond the product, beyond being a founder, beyond being an investor. And so when I think about even our journey, so in my particular family, I grew up in South Africa, but I'm Ugandan by origin. And my mother has 35 siblings, and so my grandfather is fairly amorous. But one thing my grandfather was very intentional about was making sure his kids were educated. And so he would always spend money towards school fees and so forth. And so if I think about where our family been able to, let's say, leave rural Uganda and end up where we ended up, was because my parents cared about their education and focused on that. And so my belief is that education is the most powerful tool you can use to change your circumstance. And so for me, that's why in Go1, we ultimately exist to help people unlock a positive potential through a love for learning. And in particularly focus on professional learning, because that's where the highest impact is for us and what we've done, and we see it across our ecosystem. And so often, even as an investor, when you ask the question, what's your story? If you can't articulate your why, your story, you won't be able to attract the right team members, the right investors, the right partners, or the right customers. Because in any early stage business, often it is the founder or the co-founders that are driving that growth. And so often for me, it's not a point of I, as an investor or an entrepreneur, want to make myself feel soft or want to connect with you. It's more so, are you able to articulate that which you do so you can bring others on the journey with you? And I think that's where you get to the heart of that story.
And it's not even just that future-looking story, it is your history as well. Because diligence is getting deeper now, you should expect as founders that VCs are going to call all of your past co-founders, your past employees, your past managers, your past professors to ask, how was this person to work with? Not just how smart they were, but what was their horsepower? How fast could they work? How determined were they? And I think that means more than ever, you have to treat everyone along your journey with respect, and you have to be true to your word. Because we frequently will talk to a founder, we say, oh, they're very charismatic, they seem very smart, the company's doing well. But when we talk to their past co-founders or their past employees, they say, oh, they created a toxic work environment, or oh, they were really unresponsive, and whenever they were faced with a big quandary or a big decision point, it took them forever to figure out what to do next. That's the kind of thing that would scare us away from startups, because hey, if you're not able to manage even a small team, how are you going to manage hundreds or even thousands of employees going forward? So you are an investor as well as a founder. What are some of your favorite questions to ask founders now about how to understand, hey, I want to make sure that you are true to your word, and do you actually do the testing of the products yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in testing products. Only thing is I invest in pre-seed seed. And so when you test products, they don't often work that well early on. And so we invested in one company, which is a spend management solution. Think of RAM, spend desk in Europe. And so I was trying to use it for my expenses. And I want to try the app, and I'm using it, but sometimes there are bugs in the system, and that's the biggest challenge of doing that. But often for me, when I think of investments at the early stage, you're investing in people. And so my question always is, what does this founder understand about this problem that the average person doesn't? Have they taken the time to understand the problem? Because if you understand the problem, you'll be able to build a better solution to that particular problem, whereas anyone can build tech. I mean, anyone can be technically strong. And so for me, it's often going to the grit of the why and also what do you understand about it. And so often when I go through my investment processes, it often is spending time with the entrepreneur, but also spending time with their customers to understand, do they get it, the problem that they're solving? Because I think early stage, it's easy for anyone to get to $100,000 MRR a month. You could have 5 friends that come together and you give you a contract. It's almost like, do you understand that problem? And I think the big thing here is, to your question, I found that before the winter, people would ask you, if I gave you twice as much money or 10 times the money, what would you do? Now the question goes the other way. So you're raising $10 million. What happens if you only raise 5? What happens then? And so you're almost forced to think about, how do you scale differently? Whereas what I found so we have teams across 22 countries, and I've invested in probably about 40 countries in the last 10 years. And what you find is that in emerging markets, entrepreneurs were typically more frugal in how they built their businesses, and so they almost are better faring through this almost tech winter. Whereas I found, for example, in the US or sometimes in Europe, there was almost growth at all costs, and so it's a different mindset to your point, the cost of money and what money does for your business.
Yeah, because I think one of the biggest red flags to me is when I ask a founder, why did you build this startup? And they said, I thought it was a good idea, or it seemed like a big opportunity, or it seemed like I could make a lot of money. That's the worst one. Because as soon as somebody is focused on the exit, not the building, that's what scares me. And when they're saying, oh, I was just like, or they're like, I wanted to be a founder, that is the worst. Because it's like, yes, the founder life seems so glamorous. It's actually pretty terrible. It's incredibly difficult. You have years of hardly paying yourself anything. You're going to be struggling with so many decisions. Everything is riding on you. The emotional ups and downs are enormous. And so when I hear people glamorizing the founder lifestyle, I think they probably don't actually understand what it's like to be in the trenches and actually deal with these kind of problems. And instead, what we want is them to be their own first customer. Them saying, "Hey, I experienced this problem firsthand in my past company." One of my favorite examples is Dustin Moskovitz, one of the Facebook founders. While he was at Facebook, as the company scaled, he found that he wasn't actually doing any work. All he did was spend all his time checking in with all of his managers, saying, "What are you working on? What do you need help with? When will this be done?" And he said he was just in meetings all day long. He didn't actually get to code at all anymore. And so he built an internal task management tool at Facebook to solve this frustration. And he quickly realized that everyone in the world needed a product like this. So he actually spun out of Facebook, started a company called Asana, which is a big task management startup that went public for several billions of dollars a few years ago. And because he was the person who needed the product, he knew what to build. He knew what product and what feature to add next because he was solving his own problem rather than solving some hypothetical problem of somebody he didn't actually understand.
So true. That's so true. And I think that's where the understanding of the problem is so important. But also, in your process, how much time are you spending with an entrepreneur such that they aren't just going through the motions and rehearsing what they've said? Because I'm an entrepreneur, I'm in the crowd right now, I've heard you give me the playbook on what to tell you. So how do you then discern the wheat from the chaff or the actual intention?
Absolutely. I think I always want to see somebody present the deck. I want to see them give their most refined, concise approach to how they build their startup. But then I want to spend hours kind of grilling them and asking them about why they actually care about this, all of the nitty-gritty details, and how they came to some of the decisions that they've already made. Because I don't want to understand the outputs. I want to know the inputs of what all the information that you took in for you to inform that decision-making process. Because that's how you're going to understand how a brain of a founder works. And I also want them to understand their own shortcomings. When you're building a team, you should be thinking about it as trying to cover all of the bases. Do we have somebody who understands go-to-market, for instance? I often see product and engineering-led companies go out to fundraise when they've never sold anything to anyone in their whole life. It's like, oh my God, this guy's an engineering manager at Uber, and this guy was a product manager at Facebook. It's like, you've never sold anything to an enterprise customer in your life. And so when you tell me that that's like what it all hinges on is your go-to-market effort, that really worries me. But I know a lot of startups sometimes are worried about that because they're saying, hey, we don't have the cash to go out there and hire an amazing VP of sales until we get this funding. That's why one of the biggest things that I recommend for startups is have that person waiting in the wings. When you're going out to fundraise, if you can't afford to hire somebody yet, I want to know the names of those people and that you've talked to them and they've said, yes, I love the company idea. I just need you to go raise that money so you can actually afford to pay me. And then as soon as you raise that money, I'm jumping on board. Because what I don't want is to give a startup, $5 million, and then it takes them 6 months to go and find that VP of sales. And that's so much of their head start, their first mover advantage, and their runway that they've burned just getting to a decision that they could have made and that homework that they could have done before they even raised capital.
Yeah, that's so true. And I mean, often being prepared for the capital is so important. I think to your point, unfortunately, when most people raise capital, half the money goes to Facebook and Google for ads and the rest then goes to people. But I think it's that tricky balance as well, which you find.
So to recap, we've seen a massive LP crunch that's sucked a lot of the money out of the venture capital ecosystem, which has led venture capital funds to be more choosy, do deeper diligence on their startups. And so that means as a founder, you need to be able to answer every technical product and marketing question. You need the right team that you've built out to understand this. You need to be your own first customer so that we understand that you truly understand this problem. And you need a superhero origin story that tells me that you are never going to quit. So I hope that this has been a helpful panel to you all, and I look forward to seeing what you're all building out there in the world. Thank you, Melvin, from Go1. Really appreciate it.